You're tuning into the Active Mom Podcast with physical therapist, Dr. Carrie Pagliano, a real mom's guide to all things postpartum return to workouts after baby. If you're a postpartum mom, coach, trainer, or physical therapist looking for answers on how to get back to running, CrossFit, yoga, Pilates, HIIT, you name it, without the fear of pelvic floor issues or doing something wrong, this is the podcast for you. Let's start the show. All right, welcome back to the Active Mom Postpartum Podcast. And our next guest is Holly Brooks. And I have a confession to make that I spent a really long time stalking Holly for a few reasons. One, when I was listening to the virtual female athlete conference, I think it was from June this year, there was, I forget who the speaker was, but someone named Holly who was in mental health asked a really great question. And she mentioned she was a Nordic skier. And those of you that have followed the show know that that's, my true love back in the day. And I went down a rabbit hole finding Holly in mental health, who was a skier. Come to find out she's an Olympic athlete. And fun fact, lived in a house with a skier that I went to high school with. So really long story short, we got Holly on the show today. Thank you, Holly Brooks, for being on the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Awesome. All right. Tell us, first of all, who you are, kind of where you live, where you're from, and kind of what you do on a daily basis. What do you do in life here?
Oh my. So my name is Holly Brooks. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, kind of random fact, not a place where many skiers are from, but I grew up and just created this deep intrinsic love for the sport of cross-country skiing. And skied all throughout high school and in college. I never made the NCAA championship event. And that's notable because people that skied at my level later in life, that would be a piece of cake. So I generally talk about myself as kind of the more mediocre skier or whatever that then later in life made the Olympic Games. But after undergraduate, I moved to Anchorage, Alaska, because I wanted to live in the snow. So many Alaskans have this story that they only came here for, people come here for a year or a season and stay for a lifetime. That happened to me. I found a community that liked to do intervals after work. And I was like, what? This is real? Like,
I'm moving. Do you have a house down the road?
I know. So, I grew up in Seattle and my dad was my coach and my siblings were my teammates, right? So I just didn't have the community. And then I moved to Alaska and I was like, what? And then so shortly thereafter, became the head coach for West Anchorage High School. I had 100 kids on my team, everything from, exchange students who had never seen snow before to the junior national champion, and just really fell in love with Alaska and the recreational accessibility here. And the rest is a little bit kind of history, but I became a full-time coach. And then I like to say I accidentally got in really good shape. And I made my first Olympic team at the age of 27. And so I was a full-time coach at that point. And so all the people that I coached, all the masters athletes and junior athletes came out and cheered for me at Kincaid Park down the road. So it was really fortuitous. The trials were here in my hometown. So that worked out, and spent the next quad, racing the World Cup, spending 5 months in Europe, and then competed in my second Olympics in Sochi, Russia. Then spent a year doing marathon ski racing around the world, and then essentially retired in 2016. And today I am a licensed therapist in private practice, and my passions are athlete mental health and maternal mental health. So, the two passions collide perfectly for this podcast. I love working with mom athletes and, people who want to stay active from kind of the mental health lens, but also, I can bring the coaching lens, the professional athlete lens. And that's kind of what I do today. Although I have a couple of jobs. So I have this private practice, which is really, really fun. I get to have really meaningful conversations with people all day, every day. Then in the pandemic, I co-founded an organization, or I call it a passion project, called Moms Matter Now, with one of my best friends. And so we created an online course to help kind of talk about the emotional and psychological transition to motherhood. And then one of the third buckets is I do a lot of eating disorder advocacy and awareness, and am the mental health consultant for something called Project Red S, which is relative energy deficiency in sport. I have 6-year-old twins that were the result of kind of this long infertility journey. I had multiple pregnancy losses. And so now I also have a certificate in perinatal mental health. So that was a little jumbled. It's a lot.
No, but like I don't even know where to start on that, because there's so much there. For you, like to kind of have these two major compartments of your skiing and your mental, kind of focus on mental health. Did you always know that you wanted to kind of mash up your athleticism and your experience with coaching and all that stuff with kind of focusing on mental health? Or was this something that you kind of found as you went through maternal struggles yourself?
Yeah, growing up, I wanted to be a teacher for a long time. And then I never really expected to have a professional athletic, you know, life, really. But then something that is interesting is I find a lot of professional athletes, they retire from their sport and they don't, then they have to start over from scratch,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I found my role on the team was the person who was always interested in mindset and mental health.
Mm.
How are we going to be sustainable in our sport? And so I thought about that a lot when I was competing. And, one option would have been to go back to coaching.
Mhm.
I knew I wanted to have a family and I wanted to have, what I viewed as a sustainable career.
Yeah.
And I have a huge interest in mental health. So I was like, hey, this could be a great way to take my former life and, kind of marry it into this career moving forward. Part of my I guess inspiration for Moms Matter Now was just observing my mom's journey with her own mental health. I have triplet siblings.
Oh my
You know,
goodness.
my parents wanted 2 kids and they got 4. My One of my brothers as a triplet was 7 pounds, 5 ounces as a triplet.
Oh my gosh. Your poor mother.
Oh, my mom, there was a big, physical and mental and emotional impact on my mom. So that was always in the back of my mind. And then, like I said, I had this long journey with infertility and multiple pregnancy loss. And so, my own experience with kind of postpartum anxiety and intrusive thoughts. And,
Yeah.
so it's like that, what is it? What is it? Research is me search and research and
Yes.
whatever that whatever that phrase is, right?
Yes.
So we tend to be really interested in things that we've experienced ourselves,
Right.
and then you can kind of move forward and take your personal experience, but marry that with professional training, and
Yeah,
it's a really powerful combination.
it is. And I think there's such parallels. I would love your thoughts on kind of mindset in an athlete, and especially in a high performing athlete, and translating that to first time moms, and especially moms that they want to do the right thing, that all what are kind of the pros and cons of those mindsets that are
Mhm.
just so high achieving?
Yeah, well, I'm sure, a lot of your listeners are they're high achieving, right? They like to plan, they like to be in control, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, again, I live in the DC area. I've lived here for 25 years. I feel like I have the ability to say this with confidence. And we're also, a lot of us older moms, we got a problem here. We definitely have some control issues.
Yeah, yeah, and, I think, what I'm gonna say, right? I mean, when you become a mom, when you have your first kid, guess what? You can't control every aspect,
Yep.
right? You don't know what kind of pregnancy you're gonna have. You don't know what kind of birth you're gonna have. You don't know, the temperament of your child. You have no idea how breastfeeding is going to work, if you go down that road. And so, athletes tend to be very driven. It's you put in the work and then you get the results,
Right.
right? And motherhood just doesn't necessarily work that way, right? So you're trying to take generally, what are people who maybe are a little bit more like high anxiety or planners, perfectionist, mentality, and you have to teach some skills of, hey, this is what psychological flexibility looks like, right? Like, we need to be a little bit more malleable, and we need to be able to adjust our expectations a little bit more going into motherhood, right? Because
Yeah.
otherwise it's going to be a very, very tough road.
Are there concepts in like mindfulness that you would, or just mindset that you would use coaching an athlete that would be similar to how you would kind of, guide a mom through pregnancy and postpartum? And then are there ones that are quite different?
Mm. Can you ask that question one more time? Because I have a bunch of thoughts going through my
Sure. So, are there ways that you would guide an athlete in their mindset that would be similar in a way that you would guide, a mom in postpartum? And then are there some ways that you would guide that would be completely different?
Well, if I'm working with an athlete, even before, they become a parent, right? Or a mother, I talk a lot about psychological flexibility,
Mm,
even motherhood aside, right? Because, it's this, control your controllables, right? And, this is kind of a basic tenet in sports psychology. And, I always say that I do a lot of work at what I call the intersection of mental health and performance, right? And
mm,
which I love that term. But I always tell people, like, hey, there are lots of things that you can control, right? But there are
yeah,
lots of things that you can't control, right? So even before you're a parent, let's say you're training for a marathon, you can't control the weather, right? That
right.
the weather on race day or for skiing, I mean, you can't actually control like how other people compete
Yep.
in the race, right? And so actually, that psychological flexibility is something that I really focus on, before people become parents, but also, once people become parents, right?
Yep.
And so it is kind of a theme that is, I guess, interlaced throughout my practice. I talk a lot about the concept of coping ahead.
Yeah.
You're familiar with that, but it's a skill from DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. And, it's kind of like, how can we talk about a couple of the different scenarios, right? And I always say, what are if thens, when thens, right? So I'll give you an example. If you're going to run a marathon and, let's say it's snowing, right? So
Right.
let's hope ahead, right? And this hasn't happened yet, but let's say it's snowing. How are you going to change your race plan? How are you going to change your mindset? How are you going to change your attire, right, for race day?
Right.
So that if that happens, you're prepared, right? Or, if you I don't know, have some kind of gut emergency, how can you prepare for that, right?
I'm As you're talking, I'm thinking of all the pictures I saw of Jessie Diggins last weekend and losing her pole and her glove, and then the pole to the face, and then finishing in like freezing temperatures with one glove. And I'm like, I don't know if that scenario was like, I don't, that specific could have been pre-planned. That was pretty awful.
Well, ironically, Jessie, who is one of my teammates, she has a lot of experience, falling and getting back up and passing
Yes.
everyone and winning, or losing a pole and
Yeah.
still, ending up on the podium. So, but, those are scenarios that, I
Yeah, you plan for that pole to break, right?
Exactly. And the whole idea is that, if you have gone through some mental preparation, if it happens, you've already done it. You know how
Right.
to react,
Yeah.
right? So there's this saying that, every race that Michael Phelps swam, he's already swam that race 100 different ways in his head.
Mm,
Right? So whatever happens, right, in the actual race, he's already done it and he can
yeah.
just react it, kind of smoothly or well, actually respond, right, in a smooth way, versus freaking out and being like, "Oh my gosh, now what?" Right?
Yeah. And I can see how that concept, if we can kind of prep for that to a degree in motherhood, obviously not knowing what all the scenarios might be
Yeah.
to minimize the freak out, especially in those first 6 weeks, man.
Right, right. And, I think sometimes people get really entrenched in this is how it's going to be, right?
Yeah.
This story, right? Or they have this really romanticized version of what their motherhood journey is going to be.
Mhm.
And it tends to, be pretty specific.
Yep.
And so that whole coping ahead idea for a bunch of the different scenarios, right, can be really helpful in that preparation for the transition. And I like to say becoming a mom for the first time or becoming a parent for the first time, I think is the biggest transition in one's life, really.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
biggest single transition.
No, the one thing I always share with moms is, like, I feel like we can talk about all this stuff ahead of time, and then there's a portal that you walk through.
Yes.
And then once you walk through that portal, that all of a sudden you hear all these things in a different way, and you actually like, there's just a knowing that comes after you go through that portal that I
Yeah.
wish there was a way we could make that hit differently a little bit more,
Mhm.
before. For you, like, if you have somebody that is, proactively coming to you, they're concerned about all of this, like, how do you sort of, you know, give them a heads up onto what's coming without increasing the anxiety, without, to give the knowledge, but also not with fear?
I think I face it just straight on and say, you know what? At some point, like a lot of people go into it being completely naive, right? And sometimes that
Yeah.
works out. And, I tend to have clients who are entering motherhood a little bit later in
Yep.
life, right? So they have careers and, they're maybe experiencing like a quote, air quote, geriatric
Yes.
pregnancy, right? But usually pretty educated, right? Like all of these things. And so I just face it straight on and say, hey, there are some things that we should talk about. For one, you're being super proactive, right, about wanting to talk about this, and none of this information or the conversations that we're going to have are meant to scare you. Hopefully this education will be empowering, right, and not limiting, right? It's not
Yeah.
meant to provoke anxiety, but it is meant to help you cope ahead and prepare for what is the biggest transition, I believe, in anyone's life, right? And
Yeah.
one of the things I like to tell people straight off the bat is I introduce the concept of matrescence.
Mm.
And so this is something that so many people don't even know about, right? And if your audience isn't already familiar with the concept of matrescence, there is an amazing TED Talk by Dr. Alexandra Sachs. She's a reproductive psychiatrist. And matrescence, it sounds a lot like adolescence, right?
Mm.
And what do we know about adolescence? It's a huge change in identity, and it's a huge change in hormones. Guess what? Motherhood and this,
Yep.
matrescence, right, is the same thing. It's a huge change in identity and it's a huge hormonal shift, right? And so I find once people really like that concept,
Yeah.
right? And once we have like a framework or a label, right, it adds meaning and people are like, oh, right, like they
Yeah.
really buy into that idea. And everyone knows about adolescence, right?
Right.
But no one talks about matrescence. It's insane. So, I mean, I don't know. There's
It
yeah.
makes me laugh because there's so many of us in my field, that go into kind of pregnancy postpartum therapy because of what they went through. I was one of those that I started way before, and you think you're like, "Oh, well, this is my area of expertise. I understand this." No.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can only prepare so much, right? And,
Right? Yeah.
I find that people when and if they become moms later in life, they might say like, "I just didn't know," right? Or,
Yeah.
all those comments like, "I'm so sorry I wasn't more helpful or more, more mindful about your experience." And it's like, it's okay. Like, you don't know
Yeah.
until you know, right?
Yeah. You almost want a do-over, almost, but not
Yeah.
quite. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing with twins. It's like, I don't really get a do-over. Like, our family is complete. We're done.
Right?
I got my 2 at once. So,
Well, my sister has twins, and she's like, "I don't really, know any different." And I was like, "Yeah, no, I wouldn't know what to do, and she wouldn't know what to do with one after the other." So we're kind of even in that respect. So yeah,
yeah.
you talk a little bit. I think I kind of reviewed a podcast that you were on. You talked about kind of dedication and perseverance, and how that can be kind of an asset as a athlete and then how it
Mhm.
can be a challenge for a postpartum mom. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so dedication and perseverance are like core tenets, right? For being a good athlete, right? Or, being anything, right? But or and what is that dedication to? What is that perseverance to?
Mm,
Right? And I think sometimes, we get too dedicated or we persevere too much with a certain idea
mm,
that we have, right? How it's going to be, right? Or how we're going to parent or how we're going to mother. And I don't know if this is what you were trying to lead me towards, but it's something that I think about. Athletes, they never quit, right?
yes.
And so the whole people can be dedicated or persevere in their breastfeeding journey, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes that's really detrimental to someone's mental health,
Yeah.
right? And so I feel like I have those traits myself, right? But then I also really try to introduce moms to this concept of pivoting, right? So
Mm,
athletes and, mom athlete, no one wants to be a quitter, right? And
right.
we tend to persevere, right? Even through things that maybe we shouldn't persevere through,
Yep.
right? And so from my chair, my therapist chair, right, we do a lot of reframing, right? So reframing is, hey, take a situation and let's look at it in a different way.
Yeah.
And so, that's where the pivot comes in. And it's like, hey, um, I know that you're a really dedicated person. I know that you want to persevere through this. What's the impact, right? And
Yeah.
what are the other options? And if you were to pivot in this moment, how would that impact your life? How would that impact your mental health? Right? And
Yeah.
and so I guess that's what comes to mind when you bring that up.
Yeah. There's a colleague of mine that speaks to like the female athlete mindset, and I think those are two qualities that very much are a part of that you
Yeah.
think would be huge assets, but can sometimes backfire a bit.
Yes.
Um, and another kind of I don't know if battle's the right word, but like a challenge that I see a lot of female athletes um, kind of have to navigate is finding themselves after
Mhm.
having a baby. And, especially if they do have, physical challenges, pelvic floor issues, they don't have time to work out, those sorts of things. What do you counsel? Like how do you help women sort of kind of navigate that aspect of it? If they really, there's a part of their identity that as an athlete that they feel like they've lost.
Mhm. Well, I'm glad you asked that question. And first of all, my mind is going to a video that we have in the Moms Matter Now course, and the video is called 6 Weeks is a Farce.
I love it. I love you already so much. Like, I'm sorry.
Right?
I'm just fangirling here.
And, I mean, it's insane, right?
I
Like
know.
there's really in the US, like we have no care, for postpartum
Yeah.
moms and birthing people, right? And it's you go in for your 6 week checkup, and they're generally like, hey, yeah, go run, and
Yeah.
hey, yeah, breastfeed and you'll lose the baby weight and all
Here's your
this
birth control.
stuff.
Yep.
It is just insane. And
Mhm.
so there is so much pressure, right, to get back to sport and, get your body back, right? And it's like, guess what? You're never going to be the same. And some people don't want to hear that, but
Yeah.
you're never going to be the same. You are forever changed, right? But,
Yeah.
maybe that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And so there is so much societal pressure, be
Yeah.
it diet culture. And, I think sometimes like, the sport space or the athletic space has so much pressure to, hey, run your first marathon, get
Right.
back on your training plan and start running right away. And I'm like,
Yep.
whoa, 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 no,
Yeah.
slow your roll, right? And
Yeah.
and so, I really try to work on realistic expectations and slow builds
Yep.
and get in with a pelvic floor specialist, right? And, you can really do a lot of long-term damage if you put too much pressure on yourself,
Yeah.
right, to get back too quickly. And there's no lack of people out there doing it, right? But some of those people have a lot of support. They have a whole care team.
Or it's their day job. I think that's the part that has been such a challenge in this space because on one hand, we're trying to say to moms, like the everyday mom, don't feel like you have to rush this back. But we're also cheering on so many more moms that are returning to sport and performing at a really high level
Mhm.
quite early in postpartum. And, you know, comes off the back of, the Kara Gouchers of the world that were like, "Hey, you're back running at like 2 weeks, and we're never gonna tell anybody that you were pregnant, or talk about it once you have the baby." Like, I
Yeah.
feel like we're fighting to get back to the, like, acknowledgement that we can do these things and perform in postpartum, but we're also saying to the average everyday mom, "You are not, you know, Tia Toomey, who's been 6-time, world's fittest CrossFit champion." Like it's a
Yeah.
weird place to sit right now.
It's
What are your
yeah.
thoughts?
I mean, it's a lot of mixed messages,
Yeah.
right? And it is really, really confusing. And, part of me gets triggered, right? When I see people posting about, hey, look at me, look what I did. I did this, right? And it just really spurs on those comparative thoughts, right?
Yes.
And, I mean, there is a lot of performative actions and behaviors in motherhood. And
Yep.
so, I really try, in Moms Matter Now and through the course, but then, also in my, my individual work here and whatnot, I really try to model imperfection,
Mm,
and talk. I mean, I stopped running 8 weeks into my pregnancy. I mean, I had placenta previa, right? I was pregnant with twins, and then I had a very unique birth. I delivered one of my kids vaginally and then had an emergency C-section 4
oh
years,
goodness.
not 4 years,
I
4
was like,
hours later.
that would have been a really long pregnancy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no. It might have felt like 4 years, but,
I'm sure it
4
did. Oh my goodness.
hours later. So I had twins, but I had, a
That's
vaginal
a
birth.
double whammy.
And
Yeah.
so I had a complicated recovery, to come back from. And
Yeah.
I took my sweet time. So, I wish I could remember when I started running, but I didn't start running for a long time. I did a lot of stroller pushing,
Yes.
which I think is an amazing
Well, and especially 2 kids,
sport.
that's twice the
Exactly.
load. Now, did
Right.
you ski before you ran?
Yeah. Yeah. It's low impact. It's something I'm
Mhm,
really comfortable with,
yep,
and I was skiing when I was pregnant, when I was not running, and the
mhm,
doctors were like, "Hey, don't fall." And I'm like, "Okay, noted,"
right.
right? Decently good at not falling, but like
You're
stuff
like,
happens.
Do you know who I am?"
Hey, Olympians fall, we crash,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
we're just normal people. We're
Right,
just normal people,
right,
but right? But yeah, so I think that there is a lot of pressure to come back and, have a flat stomach and,
right.
run that PR and,
Yeah,
all of that. But I think, those are really unhelpful messages for most people. But it's a
yeah,
fine line between wanting to be inspiring and wanting people
right.
to, kind of come back and not just give up, their ambition and their goals, right?
Yep,
I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying give yourself some time, right, to make it
yeah.
sustainable. And just, try to treat yourself with kindness.
Yeah. No, I feel like especially, having gone through, 2 deliveries, there's an urgency the first time around to prove something. And I don't know if it's a society thing to prove it to yourself. The second time around, I didn't feel it as much. I don't know if you just kind of let that go with experience, but I do see that a lot. But a lot of the messaging I'm seeing around right now, Sally McRae, who's Yellow Runner on Instagram, she just posted something this week. Basically, she's like, "You can be a mom and you can have goals,
Mm,
and you don't have to give up one for the other. You bring your kids along for the ride." And I think that in perspective, that's such a great message. But I think that there's seasons to that. Like, you don't need to figure that all out in the first 6 weeks, the first 6 months, even the first
mm,
years. That I feel like the message that needs to come forth is you've got time. Like,
yeah.
you're gonna be a mom the rest of your life. You don't have to accomplish all these things right off the bat. I still feel like I'm making gains, and my oldest is 13 and my youngest is 10, and I was like, I still feel like I've got more to go, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, maybe I can offer an idea, and it's this idea of participating as opposed to performing.
yeah.
And so, that's something that I think about a lot as, someone who's been to the Olympics twice. There's a lot of pressure, on me to win everything that I enter, right? Or, I hear this often, I beat an Olympian, right? Like, there's just a target on
I
my back
believe it. No, I believe it, yeah.
all the time, and it's quite exhausting, to be honest, but,
I'm sure.
there are a lot of people in my hometown who, after they've been a professional athlete, they just never compete again because they're never
Yeah,
gonna live up to their old standard, right?
right.
But postpartum, what if we can just adjust our expectations and say, hey, I am going to enter this event and I'm going to participate, right? But I am going to just adjust my expectations and I'm going to
Mhm.
make it sustainable. I'm going to focus on, my physical health, my mental health, my emotional health, right? And I'm going to kind of model that flexibility and,
Yeah.
model imperfection for my kids and for my friends and my community, right? And so that's something that I feel like I've been really mindful about,
Mhm.
being okay showing up not as my most perfect self or my most prepared self, right?
Yeah.
Or, I don't always have to be PR worthy, right? And I think, with this this persona that we're talking about, right? It's
Yeah.
people are always, "Oh, I wanna come back and I wanna have a PR postpartum," and
Right.
A, is that realistic? B, is that good for you? Like, C, what are you modeling, right?
Right.
To other people. And so I really like that reframe. And people put so much pressure on themselves to
I
do things perfectly. And
I
it's
w-
just not, it's not sustainable, nor is it necessary.
I wish I I wish I'd heard that message 13 years ago. Um, no, 'cause I'm just there's certain things that stick in my mind. One was, a delivery that wasn't, I laminated my birth plan. That just tells you a little bit about who I once was.
Yeah, yeah,
Didn't I was being polite. I was like, "Oh, well, they need a plan and I'll laminate it so it doesn't get icky." I was being very considerate, I thought.
yeah.
My son, again, he's still never read it. He's almost 13. But very much like from scratch. And then he was that kid that didn't sleep. And I remember thinking, oh, well, if I can't have this set time to do a workout, then I
Mhm,
can't do it.
mhm.
And when you have a kid that takes 40 minutes to go down for a 30-minute disaster nap, like those two things don't mesh.
Yeah,
And it's that whole idea of whatever you resist persists. And it took me a long time to be like, okay, it is what it is, like done is better than perfect. And that's the one message that had I to do it over again, I feel like for me, I wish everyone knew that. I wish everyone knew it in their bones from the first second, because it saves you so
yeah,
much energy, so much just self-guilt and just all the things.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but it's tough. I mean, you don't
Yeah,
know what you don't know.
yeah, exactly. Can I share one of my favorite concepts?
Yes. I
Okay.
would love it.
This is one thing that I want, every expecting mom, but then also, other people to hear, and it's this concept of maternal gatekeeping.
Mm.
And so maternal gatekeeping is this idea that we can do it best. I'm the only one that can do it, and there's only one way to do it. You're laughing, right? Because
I'm
this
I'm laughing because 'cause you're talking to 2010 Carrie, so
exactly. Exactly, but I tell everyone, "Hey, you need to know about this concept because
Yes,
it's a trap and you're gonna fall into it, and
yes.
hey, guess what? If you want your life back, if you wanna participate in your sport again, you need to be aware of this concept because you're never getting out of the house,
Oh my
right? If
gosh.
you're engaging in maternal gatekeeping." Right? So again, it's this idea, I'm the only one that can put them to bed. I'm the only one that can feed them. I'm the only one that can get them dressed. Guess what? If you're the only one that can do all of
You
that stuff,
can't.
you're trapped. You're never going anywhere. You're not training. You're not competing in your sport. It's going to be really hard to get back to work, right? So this is one of the things that I feel like I preach and I can't preach it loud enough. And it's this idea that hey, if you have a partner, right, or if you have someone else that is helping you, please empower them to take on some of the caregiving, even some of the initial stuff.
Yeah,
And guess what? You have to vacate the premises.
yeah,
And, I mean, there's a time and a place for everything, right? Maybe not in the first month or, right? Um, that is an acute need. But
yeah,
guess what? When your kid is, 2 months old, 3 months old, whatever. I mean, even when they're 3 weeks old, you need to leave the house for an hour if you have
yeah,
a partner, and that partner needs to be left alone with said child, and
yes,
they need to gain some confidence in taking care of that child, right? Because if you're the only one that can do it, then, not only is that high anxiety, but it disempowers anyone else in the equation.
yep,
Get trapped, you can't do anything else, right? And then all of a sudden your identity is totally changed. You
yep.
lose the athlete part of yourself, you lose the professional part, you lose all these other parts, right? So I always tell people, you have to know about this concept, right? You're not going to want to leave your child, but get out of there, right?
So, I'm gonna give you some foreshadowing how this applies, and you're running into it now with 6-year-olds that are probably in school. Yes,
Yep,
kindergarten, first, somewhere around there.
yep.
So I've got one in middle school and one in elementary school, and that's one of the biggest pieces of advice. One of my sons, his science teacher, she's like, "I wish I had let my kids do more for themselves sooner." And
Yeah.
it's that same concept,
Yeah.
because essentially they're spending every day, kind of doing things more independently, but sometimes you just don't realize that they have to figure that stuff out,
Mhm.
and you have to give them space to do that. And while you're doing that, you can kind of find that time and space for yourself too. So that concept, there's so many things that I think I tell my patients, I'm like, if you learn this now,
Yeah.
it's going to get so much easier. Because I mean, like habit building and
Yeah.
self prioritization and things like that. It doesn't go away. Like in an hour, I put another hat on and I become a chauffeur and a
Yeah.
project manager. And I mean, I'm sitting here getting texts from my son. I'm on the bus. I'm like, great, that's fine. You can figure it out. I'll be home whenever. Like, like,
Right.
so if you can figure this stuff out, if you can take Holly's advice now, people,
Yeah.
it will serve you. It will serve you.
But, I mean, a couple of things. Not all partners are dads, right? Like, I'm very
Exactly.
inclusive in
Yep.
how families are made up. But,
Yep.
sometimes I like to say dads do it different, right? And sometimes
They
it's like,
do.
oh my gosh, okay, I can't believe that's how you're doing it. Okay, I'm gonna walk
Yes.
away, right? And so
Yes.
you have to give up control, right?
Mhm.
And, I think that we live in this over-controlled society, right? Where we're to use an Alaska term or whatever, we're snowplow parenting, right? We're
Yeah.
trying to
I love
take
that.
all of the, the hardship out of our
Mhm.
kids' lives. And guess what? Like that doesn't create resilient kids,
Right.
right?
Right.
So they need to have a high level of self-efficacy, right? And
Yeah.
so if you can step back, like remove some of the control, right?
Yep.
Not engage in those maternal gatekeeping practices, guess what? You're going to be happier. Your partner, if you have one, is going to be more empowered, and your kids are going to be more self-sufficient, right?
Yeah.
So I
100%.
know that this is it's a hard concept, especially for someone who is a type A personality, right?
Yep.
But it will serve you and everyone else so well,
Yep.
right? And in my practice, I like to talk about what's a win-win-win, and that's a triple win, right? It's
Ooh, I like that.
for the mom
Mhm.
and for the partner if there is one, right? And it's a win for your kids,
Yeah.
right? And so, if you can kind of like reframe the situation and see it from like through a performative lens, right?
Yeah.
Then sometimes that is the catalyst that people need to, uh, I don't know, face their anxiety head on.
Yeah. No, I'll never forget. I was at a professional conference, and I think my daughter was 3, and she was crack addicted to her pacifier. She had like 10 in her crib, and we had them all over the house. It took us years later, you'd find them in random places. And he decided without saying anything that he was going to remove the pacifiers and go cold turkey while I was away. And of course it worked. But I never would have done it, nor would I have approved of it when he did it. But it's just one of those things. It's like I
Yeah,
wouldn't have done that, but darn it, it worked. But yeah, no,
yeah,
I get it.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no, and same thing for your kids. I mean, that's one of the big things. Again, foreshadowing. You'll get there eventually, but self advocacy for kids
mhm,
to ask for help when they need it and to get support when they need it and to feel empowered. And I mean, these are the things that I think that we envision in our kids as they get older, but we don't necessarily put together the fact that we have to step back in
mhm.
order to allow them the space to make those mistakes and figure out stuff and whatever. So pacifiers and civics homework.
Yeah, yeah,
Who knew there was a connection?
well, that's maybe a little segue to, and I showed you my shirt before we started
Yes.
recording, but I made this shirt, and
Oh my gosh, I love it.
it's one of my sayings. And if you're listening on audio, it's gold glitter, and it says, "Be a model, not a martyr," right? And I feel like sometimes you know moms and birthing people fall deep into this trap
Yes.
of martyrdom,
Yep.
and I am going to give everything to, this child or these children.
Yeah.
I am going to leave behind,
Yep.
my my profession, my athleticism, my ambition, my friends, my outside interests, right? And going into motherhood, that was the thing that terrified me. I was like, I do
Mm,
not want to lose myself. I
yeah.
don't want to lose my my hobbies outside of being a mother, right? And so, I always say, hey, how can we be a model, right? And
Yeah.
not a martyr. And that's applicable to, modeling imperfection or
Yeah.
modeling participating instead of performing or, modeling stepping away
Yep.
and, like letting other people figure it out, you know,
Yeah.
um, being okay with having more than one way to do things.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I love that. I love that. All right, you talked a bit about Moms Matter Now. I would love for you to speak a little bit to kind of you mentioned you were involved with Project Red S because first
Mhm.
of all, I think Red S and energy deficiency in sport, I feel like it's finally getting some attention. And then
Yeah.
I think the more people kind of understand it, the more we realize how much crossover there is with our postpartum athletes. Um, and really, again, kind of looking ahead at those people that are at risk, you know, that haven't yet gone on a pregnancy journey. Are they at risk in postpartum as well? And kind of some of those red flags and that sort of thing. What's kind of been your experience with this project?
Moms Matter Now or Project Red S
Oh,
or the
let's go red. Yeah, let's go red S.
okay. There is overlap, but so if people aren't familiar with REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport, the concept is you're not bringing in enough energy for your expenditure, right? And so you have your basal metabolic rate, like the calories that you need for your heart to beat, for you to walk around, for all of that, right? But then if you're exercising on top of that, you need even more energy, right? And so relative energy deficiency in sport is essentially a mismatch in energy. You're not bringing in enough for what you're expending. And we're really learning more and more about just how prevalent it is. You don't have to be an elite athlete,
Right.
right, to experience REDS. It doesn't discriminate, right? And so I think moms are really susceptible to this because we're often really busy. We're so preoccupied with feeding our kids, right? And I know I was scrambling this morning, getting my kids breakfast and making their lunches.
Yep.
I often don't have time to prepare something for myself, right? And for REDS, we're learning more about what's called within day energy deficiency, right?
Hmm.
And so, essentially maybe you're eating and consuming enough calories, but it's not spread out throughout the day. So you're
Mm,
essentially going into this fast without knowing it, right? And what we know about REDS is that it can have a negative impact on essentially every system in your body,
yeah.
right? There's cardiovascular impacts. It impacts your immunity. You get injured more frequently. It has a huge impact on mood,
Yep.
right? Anxiety goes up. You're more irritable, right? All the things, right? We're also, there was a new consensus statement that came out
Yes.
in September, right? And we're also learning more about the impact of low carb diets, right? And diet culture is so entrenched. I always talk about how we live in an eating disordered society,
Hmm.
right? And it's that pressure to get your pre-baby body back, right? And people are under fueling, right? They're
Yeah.
suffering from what's called LEA, low energy availability. And so, as moms and as mom athletes, we need to be feeding ourselves well. We need to make sure that we're eating carbohydrates. We're not restricting
Yep.
entire food groups. And I think it's really important that we're modeling good nutritional practices for our kids, right?
Yes.
Because guess what? Kids are watching, right? And if, you're speaking poorly about your body or if you're talking about wanting to lose weight, they are picking up on that,
Yep.
right? And I do a lot of eating disorder work and, kids are experiencing body dysmorphia and, going on diets at younger and younger ages. And
Yep.
where do they learn that? From their family. They're watching their
Yep.
parents. They're watching their caregivers. So we need to be very careful and very mindful about what we do and how we talk about our food
Yeah.
and body.
So much. My daughter, I remember last year, she was in 4th grade, and I think it was, like, after she ate or something, her belly was kind of a little distended. She's like, "Oh, no, I'm fat." And she's a little string bean, and I was like, "No, this is just what happens when you ate something." And I'm like, "Oh my god, she's in 4th grade, and this is" and this is what her friends talk about.
Mhm.
And you forget how soon it starts. And I think a lot of us,
Yeah.
our moms kind of went through that whole diet culture. And the only reason you worked out was to lose weight. And I very much remember that, growing up with my mom.
Mhm.
And it's just one of those things. And those of us, are kind of in the middle of this sandwich generation where this is what we experienced as a kid, but we very much want something different and know that there's not good effects of that, and need to kind of switch gears and model something different for our kids. So I think that's so important.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I would say check out
Yes.
Project.S. We really tried to create this comprehensive website that was very much athlete to athlete voice,
Yep.
right? So we kind of take the research and try to translate it, into some information that's digestible.
Yes.
And it's really important that we're feeling ourselves well. It's important for our longevity, our bone
Yep.
health, our
No.
sustainability in sport.
Yeah. I love that. I feel like this has been kind of the year for that. And that was very much a big theme in the Female Athlete Conference. And I'm glad the message is getting out for sure. And beyond athletes down to, just everyday moms too. So
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So at the end of every episode, I ask everybody the same questions, but I added some for you. So, so those of you that aren't Nordic junkies, this isn't going to make any sense. Classic or skate?
Oh, don't put me in that trap.
No.
I always had better results skating.
Yeah.
But wow, you really cannot beat a good classic day
No, you're not wrong. You're not
with
wrong.
jacks and good kick. So
Yeah. No,
yeah.
I think like the rhythm of classic, like if I could sustain it a lot longer, I'd probably like it a lot better. But just like no, I learned skate first, so that will always be my first joy.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
I will just put in a little plug
Yeah.
for cross country skiing,
Yeah.
for this audience. It is a low impact sport. It's a
Yeah.
full body workout. It's cardio. It's
Yep.
muscular. It's
It's
all of
everything.
it is everything. And so I know that a lot of your listeners probably live in places without snow, but if you do live in a place with snow and you haven't tried it, I cannot
Life altering.
is more.
Best workout ever. You will have the best butt. Best butt ever. All right. Roller skis or ski erg?
Oh my gosh. Well, obviously I have both and do both.
I
For
know.
those no, a ski erg is like a double pole machine. So it's like
Yep.
a flywheel. And I don't have a lot of time to roller ski, which is like ski training on the roads, if people have seen that. So I ski erg quite a bit, and I have this
Okay.
awesome 10-minute workout where I do 1 minute of double pole and I do
Mhm.
1 minute of single stick, 1 minute of double
Okay.
pole, and it's kind of constant work. So it's actually very time efficient.
Okay.
Um,
I might have to try
exercise.
that. I work with a lot of CrossFit athletes, and the ski erg, obviously it's a pretty big piece of equipment, but every time I get on it, so I'm trying to think. We had a workout this morning. I think no, it was Monday. We had ski erg, and it just makes me sad because every time I do it, I'd rather be on snow. I'm like, this is not anything like it. I just get angry.
I'll tell you another hack. If you're like watching some of the ski races, like
Yeah.
on replay on
Okay.
and Snowboard Live,
Yeah.
you can watch the replay. It's actually pretty fun to watch a race, especially a classic race, and
Oh,
just
yeah.
copy what they're
Yep.
doing. Right.
Yes.
So when they're double pulling, you double pull. When they're striding,
Yes.
so that's a fun way to
Okay,
do it.
I'll ask my gym owner if we can kind of install that for a little inspiration. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. All right. Where's your favorite place to ski?
Wow. So I have skied all over the world, but I would tell you one of my favorite places to ski is Silver Star, British Columbia. Um,
Ooh.
I don't know, the conditions are always perfect there.
Yeah.
If you ski in lots of places in Central Europe, there's a lot of road crossings. I really don't
Oh,
like taking my skis off often.
awkward.
Well, I mean, but the plus side is you ski village to village and you have
Okay.
drink food along the way,
Okay,
right?
so there's your pro.
I love Silver Star, BC. So,
Oh, I'm gonna, you would be surprised. There are so many people in pregnancy, postpartum world, even physios, that we all skied back in high school.
oh
And
yeah.
so I'm going to gather them all together one day and we're going to come find you and find your favorite place. And we're all just going to meet there and be happy skiers together.
Perfect. Well,
I
the
love
awesome
it.
thing about Silver Star is you
Mhm.
can all the houses are pretty much ski in, ski out. And they're
Oh,
all painted like these beautiful colors, and I think it's probably code. Every single one has a hot tub, so it's literally paradise.
okay. Yeah,
It
no,
really
I know what I'm doing when I get off here. I'm gonna
yeah.
do a little Googling. That's amazing.
Silver Star, yeah.
All right, on to the non-ski related questions.
Mhm.
What's a book you're reading or podcast that you're listening to right now?
Oh, wow, so many. Right now, I am reading The Emotional Lives of Teenagers by Dr. Lisa D'Amour.
Oh,
I'm a big fan of her.
you might have to give me the cliff notes on that.
Yeah.
We're headed right into that full speed.
I know my kids are only 6, but I do actually see a lot of, like, teen athletes in my practice
Yeah,
as well, in addition to moms and, collegiate whatever athletes, and so I'm just always trying to educate myself, but Dr. Lisa D'Amour is awesome. Follow her on,
cool.
social if you don't already. Yeah.
That sounds good. I have a lot of work to do after I get off this podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, favorite activity since becoming a mom, and it doesn't have to do necessarily with your kids.
Oh my gosh, this is gonna be really, like is it bad to say skiing?
No,
I mean
no,
I
it is
mean,
not.
I don't know if it's like, I mean, I love taking my kids skiing. Sometimes it's horrendous, but you know, I, I I was a skier before becoming a mom. Like I enjoy
Yeah,
it just as much after, and that's because I've been dedicated or I've persevered, right, in terms of changing my expectations and
yeah,
being a model, not a martyr. And um I love all the work I do, right? So some of my favorite activities are all the passion projects I'm involved
yeah.
with, whether it's Moms Matter Now,
Yep.
um, or Project Red S or my private practice. And so I don't know if that's what you were going for, but
It can be what there's no wrong answer here. I
yeah,
mean, I
yeah,
will say there is no peace quite like skiing in the middle of, like, a snowstorm, like, the deafening silence,
yeah.
like, you can't describe that to somebody who's never done it before, and just the perfect wax and the perfect glide, like, I know of no sport that can bring that kind of joy, which makes me
It's
mad that I live
euphoric.
here.
It's euphoric. It really is.
Euphoria, I love that. That's definitely it. All right,
Yeah.
what's one piece of advice for new moms?
Don't, be mindful of that concept of maternal gatekeeping,
Yeah,
right? And so if you want to be sustainable in, your life and your passions and your athletic pursuits, you really need to be mindful of that.
yeah,
And just be aware, of the inputs. Who are you following on social media and how are they making you feel? Are people engaging in performative motherhood, right? You really have
yep,
to have that lens on, and say, is that really their experience or is that really good for them? Is that really going to be helpful for me?
yep.
Right? So think for yourself, right? Manage your expectations,
That's
right?
great
And
advice.
make sure that, you're not exposing yourself to you know, people and ideas that are just gonna make you feel yucky about yourself and what you're doing and your
Yeah,
experience.
I think that's just good human advice, period. So all
Yeah, totally.
right, who is somebody kind of in your space, in your professional space that we should know about? Or who
Mm.
are you fangirling over?
Let's see. Um, I'm gonna say this might be a little less conventional, but I'm fangirling over one of my best friends and the co-founder of Moms Matter Now.
Yay!
Yeah, and, I think sometimes it's good to fangirl over people who are far away from you, but also I think it's good to be a fangirl of people that are in your sphere, and,
Yes.
I mean, it was really an awesome experience to come together with one of my best friends and create a passion project and really kind of help build each other up. And we really take this idea of allo parenting
Yeah.
to another level. So she's almost like this pseudo mom to my kids as well. They spent the night
Yeah.
at their house when they were 2.
Ah,
And so I'm gonna fangirl
I
over.
love that. I love that. We need to support each other. Absolutely.
We need to support
Absolutely.
each other. We need to be there for other people. People are
Love that.
parenting in silos too much.
Yeah.
So we need to support each other and we need to be there for each other.
Love it. Love it. All right. Last one. What does it mean to you to be an active mom in postpartum?
We need to be patient. We need to be accepting of ourselves and our changing bodies. We need to work with our bodies instead of fight against our bodies. We can't just try to persevere, right, our way back to, our pre-baby body, right? We're
Yeah.
different. We're wonderful in lots of different ways. And so, I guess what does it mean to be an active mom in postpartum? Let's work on, accepting ourselves and celebrating ourselves and working with our bodies
Yeah.
and minds instead of against them.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I loved you on paper, and this just exceeded my. I was like super excited and giddy this morning, and I was like telling my son, I'm like, guess who I get to talk to today? And
Ah,
he's completely unfazed because he's a 12-year-old boy. But no, totally exceeded my expectations. Thank you so much. If you want to know more about Holly, you can find her on Instagram, Holly Brooks LLC, also at Moms Matter Now and at project_reds_. Holly Brooks, thank you for all that you do. You're making a difference for so many people, and just some solid advice that if you've listened all the way through, you know it. I've learned a lot today too. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks for the information that you're putting out to the moms and birthing people everywhere. So thanks for the time.
Did you enjoy the podcast? If so, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes and tell a friend to do the same. Are you a postpartum mom or postpartum pro wanting to know more about getting back to running after baby? Check out all my free goodies on carriepagliano.com. This podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Carrie Pagliano and her guests to the show. The content should not be taken as medical advice and is for entertainment purposes only. Always consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions.